much and welcome to the Draw the Line 16 Days Educator Learning Series. I'm very excited to share this platform with three amazing panelists. I'll do some formal introductions in a bit, but I want to do some housekeeping items first. Thank you so much for attending this webinar on youth perspectives on identifying and responding to gender-based violence in learning environments. I'm very excited to have this open discussion with everyone in the room today. This panel discussion is open to elementary and secondary educators, along with post-secondary educators, administrators, and staff, allied teaching professionals, and school community partners. Before we get started, I'd also like to thank the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services within the Government of Ontario, whose support has made today's session possible. Ophea would also like to thank our Draw the Line partners, Action Ontarienne, Egal Canada, Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers, and also White Ribbon for working in collaboration on the DTL 16 Days Draw the Line Educator Learning Series to provide professional learning opportunities for educators like us in the room today. Let's get started. My name is Andrea Hayfley. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a teacher in the York Region District School Board, currently on secondment as a health and physical education curriculum consultant here at Ophea. I've been part of many provincial initiatives that support the health and physical education curriculum, healthy schools, and also the daily physical activity provincial policy. My background is also in disability, raising and parenting a youth who is disabled herself. I'm an advocate for people in the disabled community and also had the privilege to speak at many professional learning networks, such as the Hospital for Sick Kids, the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, Jumpstart Charities, and also Autism Ontario. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. So, with the housekeeping, I wanted to share that the webinar is being recorded. All participants are in listen-only mode, and we will be using the Q&A feature, which I'll go into more detail later, at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And this is the way that we're going to be having our participants in this room today ask our panelists questions throughout the webinar. We will be providing a summary blog recap of the Draw the Line Educator Learning Series, along with the recording of this webinar in February. The topics being discussed today will be approached with additional sensitivity, care, and awareness because of their personal nature and their connection to social or cultural norms and lived experience. However, understandably, these discussions could be triggering for some of us, and we encourage you to take a break, turn off your camera, or even just step away from the session if you need to. I wanted to introduce Lori, who's in the room today. Lori is from the Muskoka Parry Sound Sexual Assault Center, and she is here to offer support in today's chat. So they are trained in peer support and crisis intervention. Feel free to direct message Lori if you need any support, as we do understand that the content presented today may be triggering for some. And other than that, we know it is, It's Wednesday evening. We invite you to move and throughout the webinar as we connect and also learn together. Okay, so the toolbar looks like this on your screen. I wanted to share that, as I shared before, you could use the chat, but it won't be recorded in the recorded version of this webinar. If you want to speak to our panelists, ask questions for our panelists, we invite you to use the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. You do have the option to ask your questions anonymously, and we will be addressing the questions either if it has to do with what we're talking about on the moment live, or we can save it to the end of the webinar, and we'll try our best to answer all the questions to the best of our ability, okay? If we don't get to your question, we hope to address it through our recap blog, and we will also be sharing resources and expanding upon the learnings from today's webinar. We did receive a few questions through registering for this webinar from participants who may be in the room. I've embedded it into the themes today, so we'll get to those at a moment. Our priority is to also create a safe online space for the chat and also the Q&A features. So to help set a common understanding of respect, we are also going to share guidelines for respectful discussion from the Students' Commission website that is based on the principles of respect, listen, understand, and communicate. So that will be in the chat box right now. My colleague's going to drop it in. let me see that. I think that's about it. We hope that everyone in the room today can model this throughout the session when commenting and also when asking our panelists questions. Okay. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land upon which Ophea's work takes place. Ophea's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories all across Ontario. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on these territories and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by Indigenous peoples. Our land acknowledgement seeks to recognize the Indigenous territories where our work happens, and in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation, it strives to be more than just words. By learning, understanding, and acknowledging, we wish to pay respect to the rich Indigenous history of Ontario. Today, for myself, I would like to acknowledge the land on which I live, work, and play on. This is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe Nations, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also want to recognize that land acknowledgements are also not enough. The 25th of November that just passed was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And this was the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which is actually a global campaign that runs until the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. And in relation to this, when we acknowledge our land today, we also want to recognize the links between colonization and rape culture and the reality that we cannot end gender-based violence without decolonization. I wanted to share a fact with everyone in the room today. In Canada, Indigenous women over the age of 15 are 3.5 times more likely to experience sexual violence than non-Indigenous women. So we need to pursue truth, reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship through ongoing efforts. So here at Ophea, we are partnering with Action Ontarienne, Draw the Line, Egal Canada, Ontario Coalition, Rape Crisis Centers, and White Ribbon on this Draw the Line Educator Learning Series to provide professional learning opportunities for educators throughout these 16 days. I think it's really important to hear and respect the stories and recommendations for change from Indigenous peoples who have experienced gender-based violence. And learning from these stories is essential to the process of truth and reconciliation. So thank you for making time for this space to allow me to share that. Without further ado, I'm really excited to discuss the topic of consent from several different perspectives and its practical applications in various areas across the school community. I wanted to introduce each of the panelists, and hopefully they can give a little bit of a snapshot of who they are and where they're at. Jasmine, I'll start with you. I was wondering if you can introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you come into this space.
Thank you, Andrea. And hi, folks. I am super happy and excited to be here so that we can share and learn together. My name is Jasmine Liu. I use she, they pronouns. I am a Master of Science in Kinesiology candidate at the University of Toronto, as well as the lead captain on the Varsity Blues track and field team. I am in the process of my 6th year as a Varsity Blue. And so in my time there and in my research experiences, as well as my intersectional identity as a queer, neurodivergent, racialized woman, I think that I just look forward to sharing how my experiences have shaped who I am and my research interests, as well as the work that I continue to do. My research is on embodied learning and leadership for racialized women, which takes into account the idea that we can learn through and with our bodies to think beyond hierarchical forms of leadership and consent, and thinking about the ways in which our bodies interact with each other, space, and the way we learn is kind of the center of what I do. So I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about what I know and learning from the rest of the great panelists here.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Yumi, I'll share the mic with you. If you can share a little bit about who you are and how you entered this space today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yumi. I'm so excited to be here. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in school for kinesiology in the concurrent education program at York University, studying to be a teacher. And I co-founded York Skateboarding Academy with my dad, Royan, who some of you might know, actually. And we focus on creating a safe space for skateboarders of all identities. And I also recently I have become the co-director of Queer Skate Toronto, which is an organization that facilitates meetups for queer skateboarders in Toronto. And we just focus on creating a safe space for Toronto's queer community to explore skateboarding. And other than schoolwork, I also just love food. I love rock climbing. I love all sports. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. I'll eventually convert you to rugby. Do not worry. Thanks, Yumi. Trish, I want to pass the mic to you. If you can share a little bit about who you are and how you entered this space today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Trish, pronouns she, her. I've been working in the field of gender-based violence for over 15 years, and 13 of those years have been here with the Sexual Assault Survivor Center. What I do basically is I provide individual support to survivors of sexual harm, as well as facilitate prevention workshops for folks of all ages. I do a lot of activities in schools and have conversations around bodily autonomy, consent, self-esteem, self-worth, relationships, and exploitation. I'm just overall like very passionate about the work around gender-based violence. And I think that one of our big goals for the center here was to be able to go into schools in Lambton County. And as of, I'm happy to announce, last spring, we signed our PPM and we are now board approved to be entering into our schools in Lambton County for this education.
Awesome. Amazing. No, I think your voice today on the panel will really align with what our two youth are here today sharing. So thanks for that, Trish.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to get started because we have a lot to talk about in a short amount of time. I want to anchor our first theme on gender-based violence. So we all know that the value of learning how to build and maintain relationships is key to an individual's health and well-being. So this includes learning about the effects and the prevention of all types of violence and bullying and harassment, and even developing skills for healthy relationships. And what does that look, sound, and feel like from the primary level moving to the junior, intermediate, and secondary, and even post-secondary. And this also includes understanding the concepts of consent and demonstrating that, and what does that look like when you're interacting with others throughout the school day, across the school day, and out in the school community. I know through my teaching experience, helping students develop an understanding that healthy relationships are based on respect, mutual caring, and empathy. And it's really valuable to show what this looks like, not just in its isolation, but what can this look like on the schoolyard? What does this look like at recess time? What does this look like in the hallway when you're walking by your peers at school? So first off, Yumi and Jasmine, I'm going to put you both on the spotlight right now. I have a question for you, and I was wondering if I can start with Yumi per se. Can you share some ways that you have seen or experienced gender-based violence within schools and also learning environments? And again, feel free to build off of each other. I'll pass the mic to you, Yumi.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I would say that I'm very lucky to not have experienced anything too serious in regards to like physical like violence or like gender-based violence. But I have definitely experienced some stuff being on sports teams, like school sports teams and sports teams outside of school. One specifically was being on a baseball team at my high school. I was the first girl to ever play on my high school's baseball team, which was definitely an interesting experience. I think just the coach wasn't prepared to deal with like a girl being on his team, especially like a queer girl. And he just didn't know how to deal with it. And the guys definitely weren't really nice to me and just like didn't believe in me, didn't make me feel like I could play on their team. So that was definitely an experience. And I also have experienced several things like that in skateboarding, being a woman in skateboarding, guys not believing in you, not supporting you, etc.
Yeah. And it's really interesting how you mentioned how the educator in that space sets the tone, right? In terms of role modeling what safe and positive spaces can look like in that baseball environment, and how that can manifest with the other people in the room, whether they are boys, whether they're girls, or whatever they identify as. Jasmine, I know that you have some experiences that you'd like to share. Maybe you can build off of what Yumi is saying.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Yumi, for sharing. I think to just build upon the idea of like the lack of preparation and support when I was in certain situations, I've been on the receiving end of multiple forms of gender-based violence, including physical, sexual harassment, and emotional. And I think that the way that kind of there are multiple aspects of like each of those interactions that kind of overlap. I would even consider like the workplace to be like a learning environment. And what recently like happened for me was that I had a manager who was in I had a supervising manager who was just a little bit I would say took advantage of his position, and even in the fact of like pulling me aside for private meetings, constant touching on my arm, those types of interactions. It wasn't until like I gained the support of like one of my other like colleagues within the office that I was able to like speak up. To kind of relate it back to like within school, being in track and field, being a female athlete, always getting asked to race by my male peers, not out of the joy for competition, but more because they want to best me and to say that they beat me. And I would have my grade 7 teacher, who was like a 45-year-old man, being like, hey, when are we racing? When are we racing? And I told him I wasn't interested in racing him because I had nothing to prove to him. And when I brought this up with a female teacher of mine, he would gaslight me and tell me like, oh, but I was just joking, or I didn't mean anything by it. Don't you do track? Don't you race people all the time? And I think like just that aspect of not feeling supported and then not feeling like my experience was validated was a bit tough to navigate. And it's like something that's gotten easier as I've gotten older, but that's still something that happens even with my teammates. Like, hey, want to race? Or hey, like I want to outperform you in that way.
And it kind of makes you rethink your own position in the sport you play, right? I remember you were saying that you were a captain on your track team, and you also have to be a role model too. So when you get these comments thrown at you, and in our IG Live, you talked about, let's just say you're training in the gym and your trainer or your coach is asking you to do something, but you don't feel comfortable. What does a consent-based approach look like in that position? And how do you navigate that as an athlete, as a student in the spaces you're in? So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I do wanted to mention a resource that just popped into my head as you were both talking. At Ophea, we do have a gender-based violence prevention education resource. And I know sometimes when I'm out in the school communities, teachers are like, oh, how do we teach this? How do we talk about this? Yes, we know the value of talking about consent in our classrooms and across the school day, but teachers are asking, how do I have the confidence to talk about this if I'm not even an expert myself? So my colleague Shayna, I was wondering if you can drop that link into the chat box. Our gender-based violence prevention education resource has actually been developed to increase educators' understanding on what gender-based violence and harassment is, but also to raise awareness on how it can be prevented in a proactive way versus reactive from early education, along with having, how do you have these honest conversations? What does that look like when you're talking to a grade 4 student versus talking to a grade 9 student? So I wanted to mention that both Jasmine and Yumi, when you were talking, the topic of consent popped into my head too. And what does that look like when we're talking about consent and angling it from a proactive approach? And how does that help students view different situations, whether at the skate park, in the classroom, training for your track team, look like when you're trying to build a healthy relationship with your peers, with the athletes, and with your coach? Trish, do you have anything to add to this from your perspective as a community organization who supports this?
I think just to add on that, part of what we do as well is our consent education is huge, and we start as young as JKSK. It's that the preventative work that we're hoping to get more of instead of that reactive work when it comes to working in the schools. We do get calls frequently saying, this has happened, can you come in? But now that we have this agreement with the board, we're hoping we can go in and start like right in the baseline of JKSK and go all the way up through the high schools and college. and have these important conversations, and not just once, like have them consistent and let the kids get to know the people that are teaching it and work along with the teachers to do that, because without that consent education, I mean, it's just so critical.
Thank you for mentioning that. And like you said, helping teachers and students recognizing and respecting consent and practicing these skills to support their ability to relate positively with each other, not just at that moment in time in a reactive way, but what could this look like in the morning when I'm greeting my students who are entering into phys ed class, right? So thanks for that. If you're in the room right now, feel free to hop into the Q&A function. If you want to ask any of our panelists any questions, feel free to do so. We'll try our best to get to them. I'm just going to look in the chat right now. Perfect. Thank you, Shayna and Jen, for dropping that into the chat box. So the fundamental principles in health and physical education from grades 1 to grade 12 are on the slide right now, but I'm actually going to highlight number 3. Physical and emotional safety is a precondition for effective learning in health and physical education. I'll let that sit for a bit. It's really important, I know for myself as a teacher, to take the time to know who's in the space, how they learn best in the environment, and what they need to be physically and emotionally safe. And for myself, over the past 20 years, that has evolved because that's going to look different for all the learners who are coming into this space, right? When we talk about the Ontario Health and Physical Education curriculum, it does state that part of equitable and inclusive education includes valuing and respecting diversity, and that all members of the school community feel safe, comfortable, and accepted. And like Yumi and Jasmine were just saying, they can easily share experiences where they didn't feel safe. And from my experience, other youth that I've talked to in this area, it hurts when you hear a student saying that, right? When they know they're not accepted, when they don't have that sense of belonging. I think as teachers, it's really important that in practice, this means a recognition that no student is just their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their ability, their class. And we talked about this, Jasmine, in our Instagram Live, in terms of intersectionality and talking about those approaches when we talk about consent education. I think it's really important in today's webinar to acknowledge that individuals can be impacted differently by the same systems because of their identities that they may hold, such as the intersection between homophobia and gender-based violence, or even racism and gender-based violence. That leads us to our next question. I'm going to start off with Jasmine, and that was random. Are there any knowledge gaps when it comes to the convergence of education and gender-based violence and transphobia?
Absolutely. I think that there are many different gaps, particularly with the idea of what does it mean to curate a safe space. The term safe space has been used a lot to say like all our people are welcome here. But then when you hear the experiences of folks in schools or in physical activity spaces, like not feeling like their bodies or their identities are like made welcome. And so to tie it into like a little bit of the research I do for like a practical application, it's taking the idea of like being an unexpected guest and misfitting. So the idea of being an unexpected guest is like we say that all people are welcome here, but we didn't expect you to show up. So for example, as a woman, if I'm like going into a space and they say like, we welcome women here, but there are no women present, no women in leadership roles, no modeling of appropriate behavior and language, I then have to navigate my own experiences of marginalization within those spaces while also educating other folks about harmful language and bias and discrimination. And so therefore that space wasn't made for me to be there. Even though they say that that I'm welcome, I still am positioned as like an unexpected guest. And that then makes me feel like I don't belong, that idea of misfitting. Or drawing from critical disability studies, Garland Thompson uses the analogy of like a square peg in a round hole. And I think when I think about that, like standing out or not fitting in, has been like prevalent in like multiple instances in my life, particularly when it comes to race, gender, ability, sexuality, etc.
As you were speaking, I also think about the students who may not be able to verbalize how they feel, who might not have the confidence yet to be able to navigate that. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more of that. And you do a great job, I'm sure, in all the spaces that you're in, especially from the few times that I've worked with you here at Ophea. Perhaps talk a little bit more about that and how these gaps can be addressed in these spaces.
Yeah, I think going back to consent and finding voice, like saying no takes practice. Yep. And so many times we don't get enough practice saying no. And so in thinking about what makes a safe space is sometimes practicing saying no in that space before an instance even occurs, so that you are comfortable saying no to your peers, whether that's like, hey, do you mind if I like share your computer with you or share a seat with you? Like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Yep. Hey, is it okay if I put my arm on you like this? Like, no, I'm not comfortable like that. And like, I think engaging in like boundary setting practices is to connect with what Trish said earlier about like those proactive strategies in order to like mitigate those instances and prevent them. Like, that's something that I establish in my tutorials so that people say like, I know I'm not interested in participating in this way. And that way we get into the practice of saying no first before we actually have to say no or feel like we want to say no.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Trish, I was wondering if you can build on what Jasmine was saying in regards to talking about more of the knowledge gaps when it comes to the convergence of education and gender-based violence and also transphobia. And you touched a little bit about that in the first thing too.
Yeah. First of all, when Jasmine was speaking, something that stood out to me and I appreciated is that throwing around the term safe space. I think that we hear that so often now. It's to me, it's like, I know that we have to have these safe spaces, but are we actively doing this? But as I say that also, I do want to point out, like, educators, you have a tough job. You are overseeing a lot of students all at one time. And to take this information in and make sure that your classroom, your environment is safe for each student, I get that that's really hard. But you're here, and that's the first step, is really taking this information in. I'm a big believer that I think there needs to be additions added to the curriculum. I think it needs to be consistent in all schools and around the oppression and or experiences of trans folk and any member of the 2S LGBTQIA, community. We have to look at, like, what is the school culture now and how is it being shifted? Because we have to grow, we have to shift, we have to modify. Majority of educators definitely do their best to address what they see and hear. But we know and keep in mind that, I mean, there's a lot of spaces in school that are not supervised. I believe that having ongoing education for the students is crucial to make change in these behaviors. So having, and I'll talk about this later too, and having external resources come in. I know educators, you are more than capable of having these conversations with your young folks in your classrooms, but sometimes it's nice for you as well to have that little break and have a new outside person come in to talk about this stuff, because some of it can be a little bit difficult, and maybe your youth that you're seeing every day aren't comfortable really opening up on certain levels with you.
Thank you, Trish. And I really like how you talked about community partnership and community organizations such as yourself, who are working in alignment with schools to amplify and supplement what we as educators have to teach to the curriculum. As both of yourself, Jasmine and Trish, were talking, I do want to recognize that here at Ophea, as a provincial subject association for health and physical education, we do recognize that there are historical structures and systems still used within our sector that have the potential to harm to many students. And this is true for transgender, non-binary, two-spirit, and other gender non-conforming students, especially those who also already experience systemic oppression and marginalization based on their intersection identities that they hold. But I do agree with you, Trish, when you were saying that the value of working in partnership with experts out in the field and being able to supplement what we are teaching in regards to consent and aligning that with the curriculum is very, very valuable to just provide that space and that time for teachers to teach students, to equip them with the knowledge and understanding of what gender-based violence prevention education is, and also supporting our trans students out there. Thanks so much, Jasmine and Trish, for that. Yumi, I was wondering if you have anything to say in regards to this question, addressing the knowledge gaps when it comes to the convergence of education and gender-based violence and transphobia.
Yeah, definitely. I really resonated, especially what Jasmine was saying about like feeling like you're like kind of an uninvited guest. Like people say that you're welcome, but you're actually not welcome. I definitely think I've experienced a lot of this in all the spaces that I've been in, particularly in sports and also in skateboarding, where people are like, yeah, like women are allowed, but like we're not going to have a category for them in the contest, or we're not going to be like, you're going to have to skate with the guys. And I definitely think that's also a common thing, like in the classroom where like people are raising pride flags. Like I remember like a while ago, people were freaking out because like some schools were raising the pride flags and some weren't. And I was like thinking like, guys, this isn't really like the thing that we should be focusing on. Like what we should actually be focusing on is, why am I still reading the same books that my parents read in high school? Yep. And like we say that we want to be supportive and we want to like highlight voices, but we're not actually like putting like changes in the curriculum or getting people to speak about these issues and stuff like that. Yeah.
And it goes back to what Trish was saying, right? What are we doing actively to do that, right? And it goes beyond that sticker that I put on my door, what I wear on that one day to recognize Pride Day, for example, right? I do wanted to share, and Jen and Shayna, I was wondering if we can drop the link into the chat box, our Ophea's position on reimagining gender in health and physical education. And I think this position statement really helps talk about the feelings of belonging. And both Yumi and Jasmine have really shared their personal experience, and thank you so much for that, and expanding on their experiences on social and emotional environments that they've been in, and where they say, oh, you say this, but I know right away I'm not welcome in this space, right? I can feel it. I look around it and I sense it by the way people look at me, by the way people greet me. So going back to what Trish was saying is that we really need to take that time to understand, number one, our students, find out how do we affirm their identities and be able to generate meaningful entry points for them to come into our health and physical education class and also across the school day. So thanks for all of that. Okay, I'm going to check my time. 8:06. Oh, awesome. We are on time. Okay. So our third theme is about advice, resources, and supports for educators. As we are going into this theme, if you're in the room right now and you have any questions for Yumi, Jasmine, and or Trish, feel free to drop it into the Q&A section on the Zoom toolbar. I want to go back to the concept that we were talking about of emotional and physical safety and what that looks like when educators are preparing for teaching and learning in health and physical education. I think it's really, we hear it loud and clear from Yumi and Jasmine, is that when students feel safe and accepted in school environments, they will sometimes share personal information or discuss personal matters with their peers and also the educators as they become aware and be aware of and acknowledge and reflect on their feelings, emotionals, and also experiences. I do feel that it's really important to provide these spaces where we can have reflective dialogue and be able to, even for the teacher to step back and and be self-reflective and saying, what do I need to do right now to support this student who has stepped out of their comfort zone to tell me this, to share this? And how can we understand our own biases and be able to support the students and the learners in our room? So my question, and I don't know, Yumi and Jasmine, you can feel free to take turns with this question. The first one is, what is the role of adult members of a school community when working with trans students? Why don't we just start with that one first? Yumi or Jasmine, either of you can start.
I can start us off.
Go for it.
I definitely think that, first of all, just like educating students from a very, very young age on Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus, particularly trans like experiences, and just like even like telling like kindergartners or like grade 1 kids like about like what a trans person is, like really helps kids just like not think that it's wrong. Because honestly, like nobody is transphobic, nobody is inherently homophobic. We've just been taught that way, and we've been taught to see things that way. So I definitely think that just educating and just highlighting trans and queer experiences in the classroom, for instance, like maybe we'll read a book by a trans author, or maybe we'll get a queer speaker to come in and talk about like, oh, this is my wife or something. And I definitely think that it's very important to just create like a safe and understanding environment in your classroom where students will feel comfortable talking to you. And I think definitely if they come and talk to you about like whether it's coming out or just like issues they're having at home, that it's really important to like respect their boundaries and respect their privacy, especially because students can be very relentless about kids coming out. And also most students, unfortunately, don't come from families that are supportive of them coming out still, or they may just not feel comfortable talking about it. So I definitely think just creating safe space is very important through like actual action.
Yeah, and co-creating that with the students, right? I think back when my background is teaching primary grades, and one of the things when we talk about our families, and I share about my family and talking about my daughter who is disabled, like all their ears perk up being like, wow, Miss Hayfele, you have someone who's autistic. Okay, that's it, And I already have opened that door for possibly a student in the class to say, you know what? I have 2 moms, or I'm raised by my grandparent, and like you said, Yumi, being able to have those moments and times and those valuable teaching moments where we can have students to share a little bit of a glimpse and spotlight of who they are as they are, in an emotionally safe environment. Thank you. Jasmine, do you want to build on what Yumi was saying?
Absolutely. I think that as you were speaking, so many like light bulb moments were happening. And when I think about the idea of like, we talk so much about like validating experiences, right? And like, what does it mean to validate someone's experience? Sometimes an adult can take the role as a listener, as an advocate, as a mentor, as just a support, to look into resources that student might not have access to. And so much of validation is like having exposure to a diverse array of possibilities for existence, whether that is gender expression or sexual identity or different exposure to what different families look like, different traditions and cultural practices, etc. And I think that in order to like have those conversations, people need exposure to what the possibilities are so that we can learn to engage in questions and compassion to think like, oh, like I might not completely understand this, but I want to lean into that with curiosity, because children are curious and they'll ask questions, but being equipped with the ways that we want to answer instead of like kind of pretending like these different ways of existence aren't a thing. Because then that way, once they have the answer, it's kind of like, okay, got it. And like we can kind of continue those conversations.
Yeah, I love what you were saying, and also being able to do that with compassion, right? Schools are communities of care, right? We do have to teach, but we also have to build. Sometimes for some students, these spaces are the only spaces that students want to come to every day,
Andrew, mind if I build on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I teach skateboarding. I've been doing it for a few years, and I have had some instances with my students where they don't know what being gay is. They've never met, like, I'm the first girl they've ever met that has short hair. And I definitely think that, like, it's kind of an eye-opening experience for them, especially, like, I don't know, I've had some kids who have, like, met me and then realized that a girl can have short hair, and then they've cut their hair short. And it's like, oh my God, like, just exposure is all it takes. And I've also had kids, like, I don't know, like you said, kids are curious and they'll be like, oh, do you have a boyfriend? Like, when I'm teaching them. And I was always worried to, like, share that, like, I will never have a boyfriend. But I don't know. I remember one time I was just like, no, I have a girlfriend. And they were like, what? You can have a girlfriend? A girl can have a girlfriend?
Yeah.
And then I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh, okay. And they're just like, okay, I'm going to try this trick again. And it was just done.
And it goes back to what we were saying, right? What does respectful dialogue and reflection look like? And to someone who's, I'm assuming they're 4 years old or 5 years old, right? It's as organic as that, right? It's not that we're indoctrinating this in their face and teaching this. As simple as, hey, you know what? You can have long hair, you can have short hair. I can dress like this or I can dress like that, right? And I think that's really nice to hear, that when members of a school community can do that, and to also, like the second question that we have on the slide right now, being able to transfer that into a school environment. And these moments in time, these spotlight moments, are really valuable for the students too, outside of the curriculum. So thanks for that. Trish, I was wondering if you can build on what Yumi and Jasmine were saying in regards to the role of an adult member in a school community when working with trans students.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was covered, but something that stands out to me, and this wouldn't even be maybe like an educator role, but as an adult, if you're looking to change or grow when working with trans students, who's at the table making these decisions? So if you're writing policies, or if you're talking about how can we make our school a more inclusive place, our students, our trans folks at the table making those decisions with you and having their input there, because I think that's really crucial for any growth or movement. Yep. I think, yeah.
And now build on that, even offering the opportunity for those voices to open up, right? Like what Jasmine and I, we were just speaking, sometimes people aren't as confident to share these things about themselves or what's at home that we don't see all the time, right? Thank you for all that. I do want to talk about intersectional approaches to consent education. Jen and Shayna, if you can drop those links into the chat box. I wanted to highlight that in this specific resource, there are some really valuable tips that Jasmine and Yumi coincidentally just talked about for teaching gender-based violence prevention from an intersectional lens. So that's in the chat. I also wanted to talk about, you know what, I'll talk about this one later, because this one I actually have a slide on. You know what, we'll hop into theme 4. So what now? I always like saying that line because I really think it's valuable. We've heard each of our voices. We talked about how we come into this space in regards to gender-based violence prevention and supporting our students in our school communities. The first question: how do we move forward with addressing Two-Spirit LGBTQI plus gender-based violence in schools? And if you feel like touching upon the second question, how can non-queer trans communities demonstrate meaningful allyship to 2S LGBTQI plus communities? Jasmine, Yumi, Trish, either of you want to get the conversation started?
Sorry, I can't get my mic there.
Sorry, you go ahead, Trish.
Oh, thanks, Jasmine. I won't take much time on this one. I think a lot of it is what I've already kind of touched on, like just attending forums like this one, educating yourself on topics and staying on top of gender-based violence issues that are happening. Again, outside resources, like there's sexual assault centers connected with the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers all throughout Ontario. all our programming, it's free for us to go into the schools and have these conversations. I'm just looking at my notes here. I don't want to miss anything, but I don't want to keep repeating. Also, we don't want to rely on other people to tell us their lived experience and how we could support them. We need to do that work on our own. And that's not just educators, that's all of us in general. Like, we can't address something like racism and go ask people who are oppressed and dealing with this, tell me, like, what can I do better? Like, do that work yourself and bring that to the table. I think, yeah, I'm going to hand it off at this point just so I can gather more thoughts on that, because I think my notes, I've repeated a lot of stuff already. So I'm going to hand it over.
I think that one was a very valuable point, to make sure that we also take the time as educators or adults in the school community to do the work ourselves, and to be curious, right? Curious with compassion, and be able to reach out to organizations such as yourselves, such as the other ones that who are partnering up on these Draw the Line series, to be able to educate us on our own time. Jasmine, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to build on the idea that we've talked about with exposure, and visibility does matter, and integrating positive representations of queer folks in multiple spaces and roles allows people to imagine different realities beyond just like violence and marginalization. I think sometimes when we talk about folks that experience discrimination and oppression, we do sometimes center on those like deficit-based stories, and then people think, well, what's the hope in there for me? Like, what's the point of coming out or transitioning if it's going to end in controversy and violence and discrimination? And I think that highlighting different experiences so people can also see the joy in experiencing different ways of being is so important. And that can kind of go into like the second part of the question, to demonstrating like meaningful allyship. I can draw to like a personal connection, where last year there was a lot of conversation about the inclusion of trans women in sports, and sport is one of the like last bastions of the gender binary, and for gender non-conforming and trans folk, it makes it like kind of one of those conversations that we have to have about like, how is it that we can foster that sense of belonging when these like two categories exist and there aren't those folks sitting at the table making decisions. And so I think like having those conversations with allies about like, what does it mean to be an ally beyond paper? How is it that we're engaging with conversations about queer folks when they're not in the room? Making sure that people are using like appropriate language. Yes, it's a safe space to express your opinion, but we also have to be respectful of pronouns and names and all of those types of things, and not making assumptions or undoing like our biases towards like appraising people based off of appearances, etc. So I think that's like one of the ways, like having those conversations with allies about like, what does their allyship mean and what does it mean to stand up for someone.
Well, thank you for sharing. As you were talking, Jasmine, I'll share a colleague of mine last year approached me and said, "Hey, Andrea, our school is doing track and field. However, in my class, there's a student who is transitioning and doesn't want to compete in the quote unquote in the girls category. We've been doing track and field, and kind of like us when we were in elementary school, right? We've been doing track and field like this for many years, but I think it's time to start talking about it as a school with the leadership team, with the admin, and the teacher, I'm not going to lie, was a bit afraid to bring this up. But I think as the educator of the student and the student sharing this personal information with the teacher took upon themselves to talk with the admin and say, you know what, this is not right? Like if the student doesn't want to compete in this category, they should be able to go into the other category. Yes, I do want to recognize that different boards have different protocols and also policies that they're working through. But I think I wanted to highlight the brave conversation that this teacher had with the administration, how they wanted to be curious and ask questions, but most importantly, put the student at the forefront, right? Does it support students first? And I think we always have to have that in mind. I think that's really important when we talk about supporting our students, specifically with gender-based violence and what this can look like from a proactive angle, like what Trish was saying. So thanks so much for sharing that, Jasmine. Yumi, over to you.
Yeah, I think I've already spoken a lot about this, but just like, I think it's really important for, like, obviously if the students aren't educated on these if the teachers aren't educated on these topics, the students can't be. And I think it's really important to just have more things like this where we can just have open conversation. I think a lot of stuff that has to do with like equity and inclusion ends up being very boring and very dry. And like Jasmine said, like very centered on negative experiences and not like more positive experiences. So I definitely think that that's really important. And I also think that the curriculum just really needs to be revamped. I think it's so old and it's constantly fostering like heteronormative ideals and fostering ideas that gender-based violence is kind of okay and the subtleties of it. So I definitely just like think that the material that we use needs to be changed. And also just educators need to recognize that like teaching these topics isn't about just checking a box, but there's actual value in it because it makes students feel a lot safer in your class.
No, thank you for mentioning that. The curriculum, I wanted to build on what you were saying with the curriculum. It is something that all teachers have to teach when we are doing our job, and it should be reaffirming that students have the right to have that experience and that sense of belonging in our classroom. Unfortunately, sometimes the curriculum can be misinterpreted, can be positioned in a negative way. But there are also, like what Jasmine's saying, positive ways where we can use the curriculum as an anchor to help students have that access to the curriculum in a positive way from a social and emotional angle where they are feeling a sense of belonging. That kind of leads us like into the question in the Q&A. Feel free, Yumi, Jasmine, and Trish, to jump in. I can start it off first and be able to provide that educator lens. The question is, how are the teachers supported in doing their jobs? And like what Trish was saying, we have a lot to do, right? Not just one subject area. Some generalist teachers are teaching 7-8 subjects all at once, right? The question continues, are school boards providing training? Are unions supportive and providing professional learning? I think it may be important to advocate for ongoing capacity building for teachers. Thank you for sharing that. Here at Ophea, we are always trying our best to amplify the work we're doing through opportunities such as our Draw the Line learning series. I will show a few slides following this slide just to share some of the resources that we do have that are aligned to the curriculum to show that, hey, this is a great opportunity to provide a platform to talk about these topics that Jasmine, Yumi, and Trish were sharing, and how the curriculum can be a proactive approach to amplifying these curriculum expectations. Trish also mentioned being able to reach out to organizations such as yourselves, our partnering organizations such as AGAL, White Ribbon, Action Ontarienne, OCRCC, to help ask experts to support what we are doing already in the curriculum. I hope I'm answering that right, but I will want to preface that the next few slides, I'll show them right now actually, can give more information of what we do here at Ophea in regards to providing supports for educators in Ontario. This first slide right here is a snip of our landing page for our gender-based violence prevention education resource. And again, it has been developed to help increase educators' understanding of what this is and how to raise awareness of how it can be prevented through early education in an honest classroom conversation. This resource is free. My colleague Shayna or Jen will drop the link into the chat box. But I think this answers the question that was in the Q&A in regards to what is out there for teachers. There's also a free e-learning module that accompanies this resource. And also check out the activities. The activities are all curriculum connected, and they also have videos supporting how to lead these conversations in the classroom. Okay. The next one is what I was going to talk about previously. This is actually a newer resource that was just launched recently. This is our Start, Stop, Consider Student-Centered Practices in Health and Physical Education. So this is actually a free downloadable poster series developed to support educators, school staff, and also other members of the school community in creating identity-affirming and safer health and physical education learning environments for every student. The link that you see in the chat right now, we're actually going to highlight the poster series for doing gender inclusive physical education in sport. Take a moment to check out these posters. I think they're really, very punchy posters that really make teachers stop being like, I do that. I need to stop that. And what can I do to continue my own learning and also be able to support the students who may not see themselves right now in the curriculum? Okay, thank you for putting that in there. Before I go on, also the third one, I'll leave this on for a bit, is actually our upcoming professional learning opportunities. Take a picture of the QR codes. The links will also be into the chat box. And this is also done in partnership with our other partnering Draw the Line organizations. Okay. As I keep this onto the slide right now, I do want to thank Jasmine, Yumi, and Trish. We're on time, 8:30, for sharing your knowledge and also experience and expertise in this area. I think it was very wonderful to have Trish also to accompanying the youth voice to be able to amplify what we're trying to do as an organization and also how we are supporting educators to help them give the confidence and the competence to teach this topic area in their health and physical education curriculum. I know definitely working with the three of you and your participation on this panel really provided valuable information that can help educators like ourselves to help students respond safely and also effectively in all areas of the school environment. So thanks so much for that. I'm going to leave this on and I'm going to pass the mic to Yumi, Jasmine, Trish, if you can take under 30 seconds each to share any last words before we say our goodbyes. Yumi.
Thank you so much, guys, for coming. And I hope that this was valuable to you. I don't know.
I get it. No, thank you so much. I really enjoy working with you and also being able to get a fresh perspective of a new teacher coming into the system, but also someone who is doing a lot of great work in the spaces that you're in and also in the skate park. So awesome. Jasmine, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. And I think that I just want to recognize that being a teacher, it's not a job that starts at 8 and ends at 3. And so it takes a lot to just be able to continue to learn and to build that capacity to continue to build that skill set. So this was an awesome space and I look forward to continuing the conversation as we go.
Thank you, Jasmine. Trish, over to you.
Yeah, I just really want to thank everyone that attended and the interest in having these conversations. So important. I think I want to highlight, I know that there was a question in the Q&A about what's happening for the teachers. I also want to point out just something on our end, it's more local, but we started kind of higher up. So we started with principals, VPs, and then admin, and then we kind of went down the chain to start doing training for them so they could see what we're going to be able to offer for the educators. Because, I mean, a big barrier for you folks is time. So I know that you might be interested in all this information, but I also know your schedules are pretty jam-packed. But honestly, if you can reach out to Ophea or any of the sexual assault centers, I'm sure any of these organizations would be more than willing to work with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, building off of what Trish said, each board can localize this this content area, and it can look, sound, feel different for professional learning for different boards. So check that out. But if you have any questions, feel free to DM us on the side or email us. I'll put our last slide up. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any more specific questions. Thank you for posing that that question in the Q&A. We'll stay on for a little bit, but I wanted to thank everyone for taking that time, this time to join us on Wednesday. No, is it Wednesday? Yes, Wednesday evening, to be able to chat with us and to be able to listen to our wonderful speakers, Trish, Jasmine, and Yumi. Enjoy your evening, everyone.